Hello, everyone. For the next few days, I will be releasing several stories I had the pleasure of narrating for an audiobook. If you want to hear exclusive stories only found in the audiobook narrated by myself in the Dark Somnium, there are links in the description for the audiobook and a physical copy of the book that you can get for yourself. His name was Jakob Westwood. As we came to know and understand him, he was a serial murderer. While the criteria for a serial murderer requires the claiming of 3 lives, Jakob surpassed this benchmark with a chilling tenfold efficiency. Westwood was a monster, a killer, a genuine serial murderer known by the moniker Mitchfield Mutilator. Though much about him remained veiled, like his age and his life beyond the dirty shack, we knew him intimately. We knew him more intimately than we knew ourselves. His eyes, a frosty shade of gray, took on an inky, coal-black hue under the right lighting. They peered into realms far removed from common understanding, seeming almost adrift from his very form, like a vulture patiently circling its lifeless prey. His body was a mere tool, a puppet subservient to the indulgent perception that consumed him. Though, among all his parts, it was his hands that were most utilized. His hands, olive-colored and smaller than one might expect from such a gangly man, bore the coarse texture of a seasoned mechanic, yet they were never soiled or stained by oil and grease. Instead, they were meticulously cared for, nails perfectly manicured, almost as if he wished to conceal their true use from unsuspecting eyes until it was too late. It was always too late. His sickly demeanor was a sheepskin to be worn and discarded. Beneath that skin lurked something more. Of all his deceitful traits, the most devious was Jakob Westwood's unsuspecting smile. Some of us went so far as to even call it the perfect smile, perfectly measured in its spread, pitched at just the right angle, and a subtle sincerity that convinced most, if not all, that it was a true and genuine thing. The thing never extended too far to unnerve, yet never faltered enough to hint at unfriendliness. This practiced grin was just real enough to convince strangers that he was interested in whatever bauble they had to spew. Yet it also held just a tinge of disinterest, ensuring they never felt he was too invested in their lives. The smile of an ideally average person, Westwood would spend countless hours before the fractured mirror on the left wall of the shack. There, in front of that broken reflection, he made minute adjustments to this expression, refining it to what seemed the closest thing to perfection any normal human could ever hope to achieve. Westwood's choice of victims, at first glance, might have seemed random. He traversed racial and sexual differences as if playing a twisted game of hopscotch. But regardless of age, gender, ethnicity, or orientation, his victims were consistently slight of size. Some theorize this choice was rooted in Jakob's narcissistic need to dominate those he perceived as physically inferior. Yet, given his own imperfections, this notion was debatable. Others believed his preference was practical. Smaller individuals were simpler to control and subdue. This implied the person mattered less than their ease of subjugation. If this latter theory held any truth, it would explain the prevalence of slight women and fragile elder men among his victims. Another consistency with Westwood's victims was the manner of their demise. Above all else, he favored the use of a knife. We couldn't pinpoint when exactly we became aware of our existence, but it was after witnessing several of Westwood's heinous acts. It seems a grim jest, doesn't it? That we became aware of his murders before we even realized our own being. Perhaps it was foreshadowing. an indication of how closely intertwined our fates were with the one who would be known as the Mitchfield Mutilator. In the dimness of that shack, we numbered 8. Westwood never added to the collection after the 8th. It was always the same 8 proudly displayed on the wall behind his favored workbench. That very surface bore witness to his midnight visitors. And to us, it was that very bench that Jakob credited for our presence. Awareness, for us, was not a swift dawn, but a slow, creeping twilight. With each successive spill of blood upon the dirt floor, our collective consciousness grew. We became aware of one another as we grasped our own existence. Despite the strangeness of shared sentience, our individuality was inevitable. Once our thoughts fully formed, and we came to the realization that we were, the next question was why? Why? Such a simple question, yet it sprawled into unconquerable disputes. Our only constant was Jakob Westwood and his grim theater. Was he our god? The master that brought us into existence and controlled the world we witnessed? Or was he merely a stroke of paint, blended into a much larger portrait? Perhaps to understand our existence, we needed to understand him first. Tex was the oldest of us. We all recognized Tex by the crudely scratched words on his side. More, Matador, Texas. He had an ivory handle, worn with time, and twin blades that were more rust than metal. Tex was a relic from Westwood's early days, having been there when Mitchfield Mutilator claimed his first victim, and then his second, and finally his third. While the rest of us were more recent acquisitions, it was Tex who could remember the man before he was a monster. Positioned at the rear of the shelf, he would often lapse into reminiscent tales that he held so dear. Regardless of how much time passed and how much he retold the same story, it was always to him as if it was being told for the first time. To my ears, the story sounded hauntingly intimate. "She wore the finest jewelry," Tex would muse. "Her clothes were skimpy-like, and I'm fairly sure she was a hussy. But my God, was that some of the finest jewelry you ever did see? Not sure how little lassie knew Jakob, or even if she did at all. But when I saw her, you could tell just by looking. She weren't no type of worried. She followed him into the alley after all. Man, oh man, we were all types of nervous, let me tell you. The shock on her pretty little face the first time me and Jakob cut into her, like seeing a fine piece of art. Think about it. Her entire life led up to that moment right there, so she could make that exact face. Each time we worked into her after that, her face came a little more relaxed, like we were sending her to sleep. Rockabye baby. I know Jakob brought me along 'cause I fit in his pocket just right. Like a pair of puzzle pieces we were. And when the pieces came together, it was one hell of a picture." To most, Tex's persistent narratives grew tiresome, but I never grew weary of his incessant rambling. I came to understand, in some twisted way, the significance of Tex reliving those key memories. For weeks, Tex's stories seemed to become more desperate, more frequent, their edges tinged with something that wasn't there before. One day, as he was retelling a particularly gruesome memory, Butch finally had enough. "The second was a wiry fella who ran the corner store in the neighboring state," Tex began once again. "He thought something altogether different was about to happen when Jakob pushed him onto the bed. Me and Jakob showed him what for. It felt—" "Hey, old man," Butch snapped. his slobbering tone betraying impatience. "Take a breather and shut the hell up!" Tex's voice sharpened. "You're just envious. Jacob and I share something special that you'll never have." Butch's deep laughter transcended mere mockery, becoming something menacing. "Special?" The larger blade wheezed. "You think you're special? Is that why Wes doesn't even touch you anymore?" A hush fell over the display case, the silence more pronounced coming from Tex himself. It was a bitter truth. Westwood had used Tex for his first 3 murders, but once he shifted to transporting his victims to the shack, the old pocket knife had been neglected. Tex now resided at the back of the display, mostly obscured by the larger knives. In all likelihood, the pocket knife had been included as a memento of the original murders, but even Westwood's indulgence in reminiscing had diminished until Tex vanished from his sight entirely. To his credit, the pocket knife initially understood. Despite his practicality, he lacked the glamour and allure of the others. Tex held on to the belief that his unwavering loyalty would eventually be rewarded. 5 murders turned into 6. 6 became 8. By the 10th, Westwood hadn't even grazed Tex's handle with his fingers. Tex tried to rationalize. He believed his antiquity and steadfastness would eventually be recognized. But as the count of Westwood's deeds grew, Tex's hope dwindled. What were once jovial recollections slowly morphed into bitter cynicism. He insisted his rusty facade was character, a testament to his history. As the blood pooled beneath us, his cynicism turned into criticism. Butch was unwieldy. Jesco was too messy. It saddened me to witness Tex's descent. To quell his bitterness, we'd sometimes harshly remind him that he was a forgotten item, an instrument whose tune had remained unplayed. This pushed him further into mournful silence, left alone with memories of bygone days. Though Tex had known Westwood before any of the others, he had no inkling of who Westwood had become, and that realization was the final, corroding rust on his spirit. Westwood meant something a little different to each of us. Some held him in reverence, while others merely tolerated his presence. Yet, of us all, none viewed Westwood with more contempt than Butch. The memory is still vivid. The night when Butch's voracious appetite and his blasphemous ideology first came to light. The creaking shack door slammed open, shattering the night's quiet. The room was immediately drenched in a sickly glow as the Mitchfield mutilator activated the bulbs overhead. With a deliberate calmness, he ushered in a short, overweight man, his stature almost comical when compared to the plumpness of his gut. As the sedatives started to wear off, the man's initial compliance turned to sluggish desperation. He was quickly and firmly restrained, his foggy eyes slowly ballooning with horror as he volleyed threats at Westwood. Westwood paused momentarily, dabbing sweat from his brow, before his attention turned to the display. I was chosen. 3 excruciating hours ensued. For reasons unknown, perhaps a past grievance or a macabre itch, Westwood showed an unprecedented level of malice towards this unfortunate soul. When the man's life teetered on the edge, Butch interjected with a gurgling hunger. "My turn, West," he slobbered, voice dripping with anticipation. Butch's words went unheard by Westwood, who remained oblivious to our existence. But we heard it, clear and resonating. Butch's heretical demand was a sharp jab to those of us who saw Westwood as a god. "I said it's my turn," Butch growled, an edge to his tone. "I want a slice before he's gone. I want to kill him." Though Westwood couldn't hear him, a coincidental gesture saw him reaching for Butch. The meat cleaver, made from a singular block of iron with an oak handle wrapped in rawhide, practically salivated in anticipation. With 2 swift movements, the victim was decapitated. "More!" Butch rasped, echoing his insatiable thirst. Westwood, possibly compelled by some unseen force, continued the grotesque display, reminding me of the time Butch had been used to hack apart a corpse for easier disposal. "More!" Butch howled in hunger, burying himself into the man's limbs. "Meat cutting meat! This is heaven!" His earlier declaration still hung in the air, stunning us to silence as the enormity of the scene weighed upon us, myself in particular. "I want to kill him," he had said. An idea that Butch had considered became the subject of intense debate. "It's simple," Butch sneered, freshly cleaned from his grisly task. "West doesn't kill these people. I do." Damnation erupted, but Butch's grin only widened as one of the blades insisted that Jakob kills them. "Jakob uses me to kill them," he retorted. A chilling silence befell us. "Look at that meat on the table. Look at it," Butch urged. We all glanced at the mutilated figure on the table. "Now, look at Westwood's hands." They were calloused, but otherwise unremarkable. "He couldn't have done that. Not with those dull, meaty fingers. Ain't no part of Jakob Westwood that killed that meat. Without me, that simply would not have happened." As gruesome as Westwood's deeds were, Butch's verbal cruelty extended far beyond his human counterparts. While some of us took note of each victim the Mitchfield mutilator claimed, Butch's count was different. He only included those he felt were truly his handiwork. Butch's appetite for blood wasn't sated. Even after he believed he'd taken 3 lives, his hunger only deepened. Unlike Ra, who boasted of his deeds, or Tex, lost in haunting memories, Butch was singularly focused on the next opportunity to kill. He and Westwood were eerily alike in this relentless pursuit. Whoever lay before Butch meant Jack, as long as there was fresh meat to turn into bloody pieces. Of us all, it was Serge who would redefine our existence. Despite hating Serge, Butch's twisted philosophy deeply resonated with the latter. Serge didn't merely accept Butch's ideology of claiming kills. He owned it, quickly amassing a higher tally than even Butch. At first, Butch remained indifferent, but as Serge's count rose, envy and resentment took hold. Serge wasn't just any blade. He was sly. He was cunning. He was a stiletto knife. Long, sleek, lightweight. He had a nasty habit of slipping between the victim's ribs, granting them a swift, albeit unintended, release from life. While Westwood frequently chose him to inflict pain with depth and swiftness, the growing tally of deaths barely appeased the stiletto. His true aim wasn't the magnitude of the kill count, but to surpass Butch, compelling the cleaver to crumble under his own rules that he had established. Butch's bellowing was a symphony to Serge, a testament to the twisted game he orchestrated. Yet these victims were hollow. There was a deeper craving in Serge. A yearning I sensed was to extend the rivalry he savored with Butch to all of us. I'm convinced he mulled over countless schemes, tailoring a unique challenge for each knife. However, all his intricate plans were rendered moot by a single whisper. "Which of us is truly the finest blade?" he murmured during one of our rare moments of quiet. The tranquility that ensued was the ominous calm before a tempest, forcing a realization upon us. While we had pondered on our own identities, we hadn't gauged our merit against one another. Serge's words were the match that set our world ablaze, a fire he could never hope to extinguish, though I suspect he never wished to snuff it. The calm was shattered. Vicious verbal bouts and furious arguments flared, seemingly endless in their intensity. Words, initially coherent, soon became a cacophony of discord. In this whirlwind, Ace emerged as the eye of the storm. "We can each present our case, taking every demonstration into account. We'll make a collective decision." A contest, plain and simple. It was enough to temporarily quell the tempestuous storm. The five, Serge, Jesco, Butch, Raw, and Tex, eagerly embraced the notion of the contest like moths to a flame. Ace and I did not wish to participate, yet found ourselves inevitably included. One among us, it, remained excluded. After a night of discussion, we agreed that each of the 5 eager participants would set forth a rule, a measure of our macabre proficiency. Jesco proposed the depth of our wounds as a testament to our skill. Butch was consumed by numbers, demanding a tally of each blade's kills. Ra, ever with a sense of artistry, focused on the elegance of each cut. Serge's rule hinged on the frequency of being favored by our master, Jakob Westwood. And Tex, in a move that shocked us, presented a rule that resonated deeply with all. The significance of each demise held the utmost importance. With these 5 pillars of judgment cemented, the competition teetered on the edge of initiation. It would stretch a month, with an analysis of every life taken from the dawn of our existence to the end of this allotted period. As the tension crept to a fever pitch, the shack's door was violently thrust open. Jakob Westwood stormed in, dragging with him an unconscious woman, her presence heralding the commencement of the final month. 1. The depth of the wound is crucial. Somehow, in an oddly omnipresent manner, Westwood, the Mitchfield mutilator, seemed aware of our contest. In just 1 month, he ushered more victims into his shack than in the entire year previous. This surge offered a rare opportunity for some blades to shine, or for others to bridge the gap in our competition. I found myself drawn to Ace, the exclusion of the nameless 7th knife weighing on my mind. Why was he left out? I asked. Ace, worn from countless fishing expeditions and sporting a pronounced gut hook, answered with a hint of apathy. Does it even matter? For a knife that looked so menacing, Ace displayed little zest for death. He wouldn't necessarily dominate. He doesn't fit many criteria, I remarked. Ace simply said, "It's different. Silent. Just there." His voice trailed off. To the others, our 7th companion was an it. To me, however, he was something more, and his ever-silent presence, though unnerving, felt sentient. Our exchange was abruptly drowned out by the chilling screams echoing from below. Those were not from Westwood's recent captive. No, that unfortunate soul had already sunk into a paralyzing stupor, a direct aftermath of the torment Jesco relished in delivering. Jesco's screams of passion rang out through the room as Jakob lifted her high. "Nothing else matters, Jakob! Push me deeper!" she urged, her voice dripping with malevolent glee. Without a second's hesitation, Jakob thrust her into the victim's midsection. Jesco was unlike any other knife in our collection. Her blade, a spiraled masterpiece, bore a closer resemblance to an ornate tent spike than to any conventional knife. Measuring an impressive 7.5 inches, she had no qualms about penetrating a victim fully, sometimes marking the table below. Her sadistic tendencies matched Jakob's, and of all the knives, her affection for him might have been the greatest. The soft, final tear slipped from the victim's eye, their lifelight dwindling. Then, Jesco's ecstatic cries filled the room. Seeing an opportunity, I attempted to continue my conversation with Ace. How many more victims can we expect by month's end? Yet, predictably, Ace found in Jesko's fervent cries the perfect excuse to feign ignorance, always seeking the path of least effort. Jesko, the 6th addition to Jakob's collection, stood out as his most perverse blade. Like others, she'd exploited the competition's rules, focusing heavily on wound depth, a criterion intrinsically tied to the length of the blade. Though not the bulkiest, her blade dominated in length. However, her strategy wasn't flawless. As the month neared its end and the final criterion loomed, uncertainty hung in the air. It remained unclear whether Jesko or Butch had inflicted the deepest wounds. While Jesko's length allowed her to proudly mark the table beneath her prey, Butch, armed with raw girth and a razor's edge, cleaved flesh as though it were butter.
"This is madness! My blade is longer!"
Jesko's indignation rang out.
"I bring true carnage,"
Butch growled.
"I sever limbs. You only scratch."
Ra interceded, striving to instill order.
"It's about wound depth, not total destruction."
Whispers of agreement fluttered, but Butch fumed.
"They both mark the table, which is impractical,"
Tex drawled, placing an odd emphasis on the first syllable.
"But how can we decide who truly goes deeper?"
A silence befell the display case. Serge leered.
"Wouldn't it be Butch?"
Jesko's voice, cold and sharp, demanded.
"Explain!"
"While you merely etch with your tip, the cleaver sinks his entirety," Serge retorted. Debate ensued until Ace's voice sliced through.
"Jesko."
We urged the gut hook to elaborate.
"One strike from her goes deeper. Butch often needs 2 or 3 swings to achieve the same depth."
Ace eventually reasoned. Excitement erupted. Judgment had been passed. Jesko, with the deepest wounds, reigned with 7 points. Butch followed closely with 6. Serge, 5. Ace claimed 4. Tex, a sturdy 3. Ra, with a blade longer than Tex or Ace, managed 2. I was placed at the bottom, with 1. A fleeting thought crossed my mind. If the nameless 7th had entered, he would have clinched victory without a contest. 2. Tally of the fallen. Throughout the competition's month, Westwood was busier than ever, leaving a trail of 7 more victims. A marked surge from his deeds in the entire previous year. Butch, driven by an insatiable hunger, reveled in this newfound abundance, all the while harboring aspirations to surpass Serge's slim lead. Yet another blade among us surpassed both, indifferent to the body count.
"It's a peculiar dance, this,"
Ra mused, watching Butch's frustration as the cleaver tore into flesh he hadn't even slain.
"He views his master as a mere provider of meat, yet he's entirely dependent on him. Though Butch boasts of being death itself, he remains inert without the master's hand. Poetic, isn't it?"
Serge, known for his slight cunning, seemed restless. Despite his proficiency in slipping between ribs, Westwood's hands was uncharacteristically steady of late. Each of the stiletto's whisper-thin incisions bore the weight of Serge's frustration. There was a hint of eagerness in him, perhaps hoping for Westwood to be slightly more reckless. Yet something inexplicable steadied Westwood's actions. Serge, as a result, claimed no victims this month, and his once impressive tally began to seem less significant as others closed in. Jesko and Tex, fueled by their near-obsessive devotion to Westwood, meticulously recorded each and every grim deed. When the final day of the month drew to a close, the tally had risen to an unsettling 40 over a decade. Butch's rule, upon closer examination, revealed more nuance than initially assumed.
It credited only the blade that dealt the final blow. Even if one blade did most of the work, the one that dealt the final strike got the credit. The somber scorecard read as follows. Ra, his kills rising from 4 to 9, crowned the Criterion, securing third on the grand pedestal, and amassing a total of 9 points. Surge, whose count stagnated at 8 kills, held the second place for this section. Both he and Butch now brandished a score of 11 points in the overall rankings. Butch, begrudgingly taking third by his own rule, matched Surge's overall tally. I, with the blade responsible for the 4th most demises, held the 5th rank among us, collecting 5 points. Jesco and Ace, their blades equally stained, had the same score. But Jesco's prior achievements gave her an edge, elevating her to 10 points, while Ace accumulated 7 points. Tex, with the fewest victims to his name, lingered at the list's end, having only 4 points. As discussions regarding the second criterion intensified, the atmosphere grew tense, save for Ace and me. While the past killings might have held significance, it was behind us. Our focus now fixed on the 3 criteria yet to come. 3. Every cut must reflect artistry and elegance. Among us, only Ra, the straight razor, could have devised a criterion so subjective, a testament to his own arrogance and belief in his superior artistry. His razor, intricately engraved and adorned with precious materials, was a point of pride. Ra claimed that while the act of killing was mere functionality, a trivial matter for blades, the elegance and precision of each cut were where a blade showcased its true prowess. According to Ra, the ultimate achievement for a blade was to perform flawlessly for their master, and Ra believed he achieved just that. His blade sang as it danced over his master's prey, severing carotid arteries and windpipes with exquisite grace. For his master, Ra's cuts were flawless, and his work was nothing short of divine. Calling him inspired would be an understatement. The fact that his master chose him 5 times in a single month filled him with euphoria. A cut's true measure is its precision and the purity of the blood that follows, Ra stated during the 3rd deliberation.
That's me then. I make the best cuts of all,
Butch boasted.
You're efficient, yes, but elegance eludes you,
Ra retorted.
Your cuts leave torn and uneven flesh, the opposite of elegance. I must say, my work explores new depths,
Jesco purred.
You can't even cut properly,
Ra sneered.
So, who is the master of the elegant cut?
Jesco pressed. Ra, confident, responded.
The answer is clear to see. Of course it's me.
Jesco's reply was weighted.
If beauty is determined by precision, I'd say someone else here might be even more precise than you.
Ra almost scoffed at the notion before realizing an error in his planning. The room's gaze abruptly shifted to me.
No!
Ra cried, a mixture of indignation and disbelief.
There's a clear distinction in craftsmanship,
Surge chimed.
Your cuts are pristine, but our friend here showcases a complexity you can't match. That's not a cut!
Ra spat, trying to regain his footing.
It's not even a slice!
Despite his arrogance, I felt sympathy for Ra. This contest meant everything to him. I prepared to defend him when Tex interrupted.
All this fuss about pretty cuts. Bullshit! Even Butch's work counts as a cut,
Tex argued.
Watch it, Rusty,
Butch growled.
All I'm saying is that the only thing that means squat is the practicality aspect,
Tex concluded.
Of course, not only are my cuts precise, but they also ensure a swift demise,
Ra responded, flustered. Ace, ever observant, remarked, "Funny how you dismissed the importance of that just moments ago." The room's focus intensified on Ra, who found himself cornered. The verdict was finalized. I was deemed the most artful of cuts, placing me first in the round and bringing my total score to 12 points, tied with Ace overall. Ra, not one to be easily overshadowed, reluctantly took second, driving his cumulative score up to 15 points. Ace, leaning on his tried-and-true methods, secured third place, bringing his total score to 12 points. Serge, always with an eye for his due, landed fourth, yet his amassed points put him at the pinnacle, sharing the lead with Ra at 15 each. Tex, nursing his bitterness like fine whiskey, managed fifth, pulling his total to 7 points. Butch, never one to shy from excess, begrudgingly settled for sixth, increasing his total to 13 points. Jesco, ever the spiraling succubus, met an unfortunate descent to the 7th position, yet her overall score was lifted to 11 points. With evident frustration, Tex declared,
"This round might be over, but the competition ain't."
Ra's glare locked onto me. With icy resolve, he whispered back,
"On that, we agree."
4. Blade shall be judged by Westwood's frequent favor.
"Damn it!"
Butch's outburst was near insatiable, his metallic voice reverberating with fury.
"Damn it, damn it, damn it! Compose yourself,"
Ron toned, making it sound more like a command than a suggestion.
"There's still one more criteria to go." "Indeed, there's always hope, even from 5th place."
Serge snickered with a hint of greedy amusement. As the echoes of the 4th deliberation faded, the results brought forth chilling clarity. Serge's criterion had been deceptively simple, yet so easily misunderstood. Everyone had assumed favoritism was about how often or for how long a blade was chosen for a task. Instead, Serge had meant the amount of times Jakob Westwood physically touched each blade. This nuanced detail tilted the balance towards lightweight blades like Serge and Jesco, frequently getting lodged in their victims, and away from the heftier blades like Butch. Every regrip, every touch, every moment of repositioning became an indicator of favor.
I wish I could chop you up,"
Butch seethed, his rank having slipped drastically. Serge smirked.
"I'm sure I would be bad for your voracious appetite."
He had gambled with his rule, knowing Jesco would place first, while she proudly claimed that spot. It only tied her for second overall. Serge's own 2nd place finish, meanwhile, pushed him to a clear lead in the 1st position.
"Count again!"
Butch demanded. Groans filled the room. Our curse was perfect recall, and we had already counted twice.
"I am not going to waste another second counting."
Ra's patience was clearly thinning. His own standings had been affected, tying him for the dreaded 2nd position.
"Well, he didn't count at all,"
Butch sharply noted, referring to Ace.
"Too much work."
Ace yawned, content in his position as the 3rd most favored blade.
"Enough!"
Jesco said, her voice both stern and seductive.
"While you whine, I bask in Westwood's favor."
She allowed a hint of a smile to play on her lips.
"The truth is in the touch, Butch. And tonight, I was touched the most. Shall we move on?"
Ra, his pride slightly wounded but ever piercing, fixed me with a glare as sharp as a honed edge.
"Do you agree, O perfect 8th knife?"
As the 4th most favored blade, I paused, then responded simply, "We proceed." 5. Every blade was in agreement,
The significance of the kill was of utmost importance. After they had set the final criterion, Tex added on, casting a sly glance at the others, especially Serge.
Now that we're laying out our contest, I got me a stipulation I'd like to propose.
All blades turned their focus to him, curiosity evident in their non-physical expressions. He chose his words carefully, painfully aware that Jacob hadn't selected him, and likely wouldn't for this crucial month.
I reckon my method of judging ought to be worth double the points,
he declared with a hint of desperation. From the gathering, a wave of reactions arose. Butch practically salivated.
Doubling the points? Sounds delicious.
Serge smirked.
A tempting twist, Tex. It could make our game all the more rewarding.
Jesco's voice dripped with anticipation.
Anything to get closer to Jacob's touch.
Ra, with a calm, self-assured tone, responded.
Let's not be hasty, but the audaciousness, I must admit, is an art in itself.
Agreed, the blades said in unison. This maneuver was Tex's best shot at winning. He felt assured about this round, but the others knew that even with the additional 14 points from first, he'd likely rank 4th or 5th overall. A second-place finish here, with 12 more points, could catapult someone to the top. While it was agreed that Jacob's first ever kill held the most importance, determining the second most significant proved more challenging. A sea of nameless faces was an endless parade of victims. How does one stand out amongst the rest? As always, Serge had an answer.
If the first victim is the most important, wouldn't the last be a close second?
Serge proposed with a mischievous gleam in his eye. The weight of Serge's argument was undeniable. In the midst of countless faceless victims, the first and the last seemed to stand out. Although Serge might have been playing a game with his words, the majority took him seriously, and thus it was decided the last victim of the month would be deemed the second most important. The ranking would then descend into speculation. Perhaps the first elderly victim, or the first woman, followed by the largest or smallest victim, and so on. As the days dwindled, tension enveloped our collective consciousness. Victim after victim met their end. But which one was the last? A 6th fell to Ra's blade. Was it the finale? Then, on that final day, as moments slipped by, another victim was hauled into the shack, her lack of inebriation evident from her cries.
Jacob!
The woman pleaded, being thrust onto the floor.
Please stop!
We all sensed something unprecedented was unfolding. No victim had ever invoked Jacob's name. The room's atmosphere grew thick, but a presence, more imposing than any of ours, started to stir. Jacob Westwood stood over the woman, his lanky form scarred and his eyes aflame with anger.
Jacob,
she whispered, her dark hair shielding her terror-stricken eyes.
Never again,
Jacob hissed. From our collective, the ominous aura of the 7th, it, grew in volume. The trench knife, distinguished by its worn knuckle-buster and a massive blade, had always quietly commanded our attention, not only for its design, but the weight of its silent, gruesome history.
Jacob, please, this isn't you,
she murmured, but her words only fanned the flames of Jacob's rage. With brutal force, he dragged her towards the table. As he did, the 7th blade, it, broke its silence, letting out a deafening scream.
Each mark on its blade seemed to tell tales of haunting sights and unsightly horrors. As Jacob reached for it, there was a sense of finality, a union of two entities bound by unspeakable rage. The seventh screams, never heard before, now threatened to drown everything. As Jacob and the trench knife united in their fury, their screams intermingling in a ghastly symphony. The woman's life ended in a gruesome blend of fury and fear as she was beaten and stabbed to death. Blood sprayed, bones shattered. Once the fury had subsided, the seventh knife returned to its resting place, its silence now more deafening than ever. Jacob exited, leaving the room thick with unsaid words and contemplation. The final criteria had been met in the most unforeseen manner, with the last kill taken by the only blade that had been excluded from the competition. Time stretched as our deliberations drifted, intertwining with other moments as time's linear constraints seemed to fade entirely. The passage of time became blurred, but the world came into focus again as the shack's door swung open, revealing two faces. With urgency, Jacob leaned his back against the door and hastily blocked the entrance.
Uncle Jacob?
A young girl's voice wavered, her raven hair falling in front of wide, uncertain eyes, her gaze fixed on the horrific scene left out on the table. She broke into a fit of terror, screaming and sobbing as recognition struck her. Her cries intertwined with Jacob's unsettling laughter and incoherent mutterings. Jacob's mind began to break, spittle flying from his lips, when the distant hum of approaching vehicles reached his ears. Westwood snapped back to his senses, lunging for the girl. He caught her by the hair. Her struggles were in vain against his monstrous grip. Willpower alone wasn't enough to fight such a monster. She, the raven child, screamed and clawed as Jacob threw her onto the table, right onto the shattered form below. Her shrieks fell silent in the face of the gruesome sight beneath her, touching the unmoving flesh as her own form trembled. Jacob's eyes grew sharp as he reached for a knife. Wood splintered as the door buckled under force and men bearing badges stormed in, their guns trained on the scene. Jacob reached towards the child, but before he could act, a thunderous shot rang out. A bullet found its mark, sending Jacob sprawling against the wall. The raven-haired girl, shaking and traumatized, took refuge behind the towering figures, who moved in, their weapons still aimed at the now bleeding figure of Jacob. Amidst the chaos, Westwood managed to maintain his balance on shaky legs. As he gazed at those who had come for him, his sharp features softened momentarily. There was a fleeting moment, a glimpse of clarity in Jacob's eyes, a hint of sanity in an otherwise fractured mind. The officer's shouts held an edge of desperation, a duty clashing with dread. Yet, Westwood's fingers only tightened around what he held. In a heartbeat's hesitation, Jacob Westwood, the god, the chained, the man, embraced oblivion. No blade made a sound. Hours felt like mere minutes as personnel bustled about, collecting the remains of the black-haired woman and other grim evidence. Eventually, they collected us too, removed from the only world we'd known. We were sealed off, isolated from one another. Strangers held and scrutinized me. Unfamiliar hands delicately explored my form, their touch echoing a familiarity only Westwood once had. The absence of death, while being held, brought an unexpected comfort. For the first time, I felt the pull of sleep, and I welcomed its embrace. At first, it merely stole moments from me. However, as the grip of darkness grew tighter, my consciousness began to wane. Yet just as I teetered on the edge of endless sleep, sudden light thrust us back into focus one last time. Displayed for an audience, we were both trophies and witnesses to Westwood's legacy, observed by a group who tarnished our deceased god's name, branding him both madman and coward. Among us were Tex, the pocket knife, Butch, the cleaver, Surge, the stiletto, Ra, the razor blade, Jesco, the spiraling blade, Ace, the fishing knife, it, the trench knife, and myself, the eighth, Westwood's skinning knife. In the presence of my kin, words were no longer necessary. The contest had concluded, and poor Tex had only managed second place in his own criterion. I alone was Jacob Westwood's greatest knife, a position that no one could dispute. As my consciousness dwindled into a distant dream, the thought dawned. Could there have been a grander design? Was there meaning to my existence? Among the blades, only I held genuine hatred toward Jacob Westwood. So, when he chose his own end to avoid his capture, how blessed I was to have been the one that killed him.